From pig farm to thriving neighborhood, the history of the Ottawa Hills community. In 1992, the Ottawa Hills neighborhood made a video about the history of the Ottawa Hills community. Alan Bennett was on the committee, and Dale Hall was the voice in the video. 2017, Alan Bennett and the Grand Rapids Historical Society asked the neighborhood to do a program about the neighborhood and update the history on what happened in the past 25 years since the video. A committee was formed and the process began. This program will be into greater detail and includes topics not covered in the original video. The video can be seen on the association website, www.ottawahillsgr.org, under News. Today, you will hear about the development of the 80 acres, activities over the past 97 years, architecture of the homes in the community, and about the people who lived in the neighborhood and attended Ottawa Hills High School up to 1972. Many people who choose to live in Ottawa Hills neighborhood do so because they are drawn to the historic nature of the homes, which are set amongst mature trees on winding streets. Nearly 97 years after its formation, Ottawa Hills continues to be regarded as a friendly, resilient city neighborhood that has weathered the tests of time and changing civic trends. The neighborhood's architectural character and the efforts of its residents to solve challenges of urban living and provide quality neighborhood activities continues to make Ottawa Hills one of the most desirable places to live in Grand Rapids. From 1923 through the 1950s, homes were designed by 21 architects and built by more than 25 builders. Today, there are more than 290 homes in Ottawa Hills. In 1891, a portion of the land between Fuller and Plymouth and north of Hull, that included what was to become Ottawa Hills, was annexed by the city of Grand Rapids. The specific property that was to become Ottawa Hills was bordered on the north by Fifth Avenue, now Franklin Street, and on the south by Hall Street. Grand Rapids Township, now East Grand Rapids, was on the east, and Giddings Avenue was on the west. 80 acres of the annexed land lay within the city of Grand Rapids, and 80 acres within Grand Rapids Township. Legend says the neighborhood of roughly 1 square mile was once an Ottawa Indian village governed by Chief Pontiac. Chief Pontiac of the Ottawa Indians was an important figure in American Indian struggle against the British occupation of the Great Lakes area in the 1700s. The earliest recorded use of the land was as a 160-acre pig farm owned by Nelson Higby. During the heyday of the streetcars, the area that became Ottawa Hills escaped development because of a 9-hole golf course that sprouted on the former farm of Nelson Higby in 1905. W.H. Simons, a former golf pro and instructor at the Kent Country Club, entered into a 10-year lease on the land east of Franklin Park, now Martin Luther King Park. He constructed a 9-hole course called the Fifth Avenue Club and built the Fifth Avenue Clubhouse. The U.S. Department of Interior's article, An Overview of Suburbanization in the United States, 1830 to 1960, reports the evolution of American suburbs was divided into 4 stages. Stage 2 was streetcar suburbs, 1888 to 1928. Simons understood the importance of the streetcar and assumed the streetcar line that ran down Fifth Avenue would be extended to provide public access to the links on his course. He was incorrect. The streetcar line was not extended to his course. By 1907, the struggling Fifth Avenue Club went through a reorganization but ran into more trouble. In 1907, William G. Gilbert and W.R. Griffith purchased the 160 acres of land from the Nelson Higby farm for around $20,000 and took over the Simons lease for the golf course. At the time, the purchase price was considered to be what the land was worth. Residential development had not spread that far east. The property was inaccessible by streetcar, and the streets had not yet been improved. A dispute between the new owners and Simons ended up with Simons excluding the clubhouse from the deal. As a result, the Fifth Avenue Club converted an old farmhouse on Giddings Street as their temporary clubhouse and renamed the course the Highlands Golf Club. This, in turn, made it necessary to revamp the layout of the golf course, putting Mr. Simons' fine clubhouse off in the corner of the links. Meanwhile, the Highlands Club proposed building a new modern clubhouse on the knoll and expanding the course to 18 holes in the future. The new course opened in the spring of 1908. On November 3, 1911, a few days after the final social event of the golf season, the clubhouse burned to the ground during the night. By the time the firemen arrived, the building was a total loss, destroying any clues to the cause of the fire. The closest hydrant was at Giddings and Alexander. Fortunately, Mrs. Josephine Thompson, the building's housekeeper, had moved out. The caretaker in charge of the grounds, Vernie White, reported he had inspected the building in the early evening and was positive the clubhouse was securely locked. Damage was estimated at $9,000. Insurance only covered $4,000. Most personal property had been removed at the close of the season. The only victim of the blaze was the housekeeper's coach hound, who had been left in the house. The new Highlands Golf Club house opened August of 1912. The 100 members enjoyed the surrounding oaks and the large reception room with its open brick fireplace in the center. The clubhouse included a ladies' dining room, lockers, and retiring rooms on the right. The men's grill room, buffet, and kitchen were located on the left. The upper level featured the men's locker room with 3 shower baths and the latest in ventilated steel lockers. The club also provided tennis courts. Invitations to club gatherings were highly prized as Mrs. Dray, the housekeeper, served dainty lunches on the veranda, which overlooked the 9-hole course, as well as more elaborate meals. Mr. Dray, her husband, formerly of the Ridge Golf Club of Chicago, was the Highlands professional. By 1915, speculators were looking for land to expand. This spelled doom for the Highlands, because although members wanted to expand the golf course to 18 holes, the rising cost of land made it prohibitive. A movement then began to have the city pick up the last 2 years remaining on the original 10-year lease. It was hoped that if the city offered free public golfing, it could be demonstrated how useful such a recreational site could be. Nothing transpired from the efforts of this movement. In the spring of 1916, 50 golfers got together and organized to take over the lease of the Highlands layout on Fifth Avenue and named it the Grand Rapids Golf Club. Dues were $25 a year, and William H. Downs was engaged as the head professional. When the Highlands Golf Club finally moved to its new home on West Leonard, the newly organized Grand Rapids Golf Club took over the vacated 9-hole course, commonly known as the Sandlot. Some criticism was directed at the Highlands officials for allowing cattle on the old course, but little damage was done. By late 1919, the Grand Rapids Golf Club also wanted an 18-hole course. They selected a site in Cascade Hills, now Cascade Country Club, which opened in 1922. Increased demand for land within Grand Rapids city limits occurred during the Roaring '20s. Suburbanization was now in the U.S. Department of Interior's third stage, early automobile suburbs, 1928 to 1945. The introduction of Henry Ford's Model T in 1908 moved this third stage forward. The rapid adoption of the mass-produced car led to the creation of the automobile suburb of single-family homes on spacious lots, which became the standard American landscape of the 20th century. The Ottawa Hills neighborhood was to become an automobile suburb. The area appealed to the upper and middle class, who had the finances and automobiles, and who wanted to live outside of Heritage Hill. In the fall of 1922, Mr. William T. Gilbert, one of the property owners who purchased the land in 1907, and Benjamin S. Hatchett developed the northwest 40 acres of the old Higbee Farm, east of Giddings Avenue between Franklin Street and Alexander. Mr. Gilbert formed the Ottawa Hills Land Company and used the legend that the neighborhood was once an Ottawa Indian village governed by Chief Pontiac as a promotional tool to sell lots in the 1920s. The plat featured beautiful, winding drives, which may have followed the contours of the old golf course, a grand boulevard, and large open areas where the streets intersected in accordance with the national City Beautiful movement. Mr. Dorgan of Detroit, one of the country's greatest home planning experts, laid out the 10 irregular blocks of 170 to 180 lots, which varied in width from 50 to 83 feet. The sales of lots, which ranged in price from $1,000 to $2,000, were offered by the Gilbert, Fletcher, and Dodge agencies. Most lots were sold for $1,500. Building restrictions were established to secure permanence of the plat as a high-class residential district. Only single homes were to be built to cost no less than $7,000 to $10,000. Electric and telephone services were located at the rear of the lots so that there were no overhead wires on the platted streets. Fences had to be in line with the house fronts. Corner houses were required to have attached garages. Streets were to be no less than 66 feet wide and lots no less than 50 feet wide. One owner, in a deed recorded November 26, 1927, added a restriction. Said lot shall not be occupied by a colored person or sold to a colored person. Prospective buyers were urged to act quickly, to pick up a plat guide out there at the clubhouse to guide them in selecting a lot of their choice for either investment or building purposes. Most of the 169 lots in the north 40 acres were sold within 2 weeks. This success encouraged Gilbert and his associates to develop the 40 acres immediately to the south. This additional 40-acre development was laid out with the curved streets in harmony and connecting with the streets of the original 40 acres. Building restrictions and sales conditions were the same. In July of 1923, the additional 40 acres, or second round of lots, were platted and offered for sale. The added incentive for purchase was a new high school to be located in the center of the Ottawa Hills neighborhood. On April 30th, 1923, the Grand Rapids Public School District purchased 2 city blocks between Alexander and Fisk to construct the Ottawa Hills High School. They paid $28,000. The block the school grounds were occupying was somewhat swampy, but was conveniently filled with the excess dirt from area housing excavations. The high school and Pontiac athletic field were started in 1923 and completed in 1925. In 1927, the third and final section of the neighborhood was platted and placed on the market. The Indian Village unit plat is in East Grand Rapids, but was advertised as the best place in Grand Rapids to live. By 1928, 200 brick homes dotted the landscape of Ottawa Hills. Some lots were sold and resold as many as 4 times, with as much as a 50% profit. A completed residential neighborhood was in place prior to the Depression, when most construction stopped. There was little change during the Depression and World War II era. It was during that time the neighborhood traditions, like the Hollyhock Lane Parade, were initiated. Like most urban neighborhoods, Ottawa Hills was affected by changing social times. The turbulent 60s lowered home values. Racial tensions and the related white flight were cited as causes. In the late 1960s, when racial tensions made some residents uneasy, property values plunged when realtors took advantage of the situation. As a response to for sale signs popping up, the residents organized the Ottawa Hills Neighborhood Association, one of the first neighborhood associations in the city. As a result of the redlining and blockbusting by the realtors, charges of unethical practices had been filed by the neighborhood with the State Civil Rights Commission in 1972. The association persuaded realtors to declare a moratorium on for sale signs, stop soliciting with scare tactics, and to work with the Grand Rapids Board of Realtors regarding fair housing practices, so no official lawsuit was filed. The Neighborhood Association was formally established in the early 1970s by a small group of neighbors to provide residents with the opportunity of interacting with one another in civic and social pursuits aimed at developing a better sense of a community. The organizers wanted to promote stabilization and maintain quality urban living environment. The association dealt with safety issues, such as the 1979 firebombing of a residence, and they established a crime watch in 1980. Today, the Ottawa Hills Neighborhood Association actively supports programs to preserve the integrity and promote the safety of Ottawa Hills. The association board currently meets monthly with an annual all-residents meeting at the end of the calendar year. The neighborhood was divided into 11 blocks, and there are volunteer block captains for each. Besides the block captains, the board consists of elected officers and committee chairpersons. However, all Ottawa Hills residents are invited to attend and discuss neighborhood concerns, to voice opinions, and to become acquainted with the current active board. The association dues were originally $5 a year and are today $20. Dues are used to sponsor neighborhood activities. Since the formation of the Ottawa Hills Neighborhood Association, it has sponsored the following activities: Neighborhood Watch, Child Watch, Neighborhood Security Services, participation in the Grand Rapids Council of Neighborhood Associations, the Southeast Babysitting Cooperative, the Historical Committee, 1988, which researched and produced the video we've talked about earlier, the Ottawa Hills Book Club, the Ottawa Hills PTA Bridge Group, which funded the Ottawa Hills Elementary PTA, and later other services for the public schools. Ad hoc committees were set up over the years. The first was to establish the positive working relationship with the Grand Rapids Board of Realtors, especially in regards to fair housing practices. Another was the task force that worked with the Board of Education regarding the sale of the Grand Rapids Public School in the neighborhood. Task force were also established to replace streetlights in 1972 and again in 2017. Social action forums were held on topics of community interest at East Congregational Church, located at the edge of Ottawa Hills. The church has often volunteered its use for neighborhood events and meetings. Another thing that makes Ottawa Hills desirable is its access to the Grand Rapids Public Library branch on the corner of Giddings and Hall, built in 1957, a short walk and a book lover's dream. The Neighborhood Association often held a winter holiday party in December. Monthly Friday night happy hours are also held. Block parties, Easter egg hunts, and in 2018 was the 25th annual garden tour in June, the neighborhood cleanup day in July, the ice cream social as part of the National Night Out in August. Tree planting projects. The association has planted 128 trees since 2007. There is also a neighborhood garage sale, a movie night outside the Grand Rapids Christian Elementary School during the summer. The Hollyhock Lane Parade on the 4th of July has been a tradition in the neighborhood since 1934. Organized by the Calvin Giddings Patriotic Association, the parade travels through the neighborhood on its way to its end in Hollyhock Lane, which is between our Giddings neighbors and Calvin Southeast. In addition to the Holly Mock Band, floats designed by residents, old cars, motorcycles, a large gathering of neighborhood children on decorated bicycles. There are local candidates for both political parties running for election. Gerald R. Ford spoke at 3 Hollyhock Lane events. If you live in the neighborhood, you will never miss this national celebration, and many neighbors return for the parade long after they've moved out of the neighborhood. To this day, the association sends all its residents an annual newsletter, the OHNA News, and monthly emails to keep neighbors informed of events and activities in the community. There's also a website available, as discussed, at www.ottawahillsgr.org. Mention that you live in Ottawa Hills, and the response always seems to be, "I love that neighborhood. All the houses are beautiful. Indeed, multitude of vintage brick homes on a beautiful curved tree-lined streets is an outstanding characteristic. Architectural styles ranging from Williamsburg colonial to Spanish stucco to English cottage to the 1920s American modern are posed to perfection on the woodsy lots. Aficionados of architectural trim work are often caught staring upwards to turrets, unconventional chimney pots, personalized doorway insignias, and molded stonework as they stroll through the neighborhood. Many of these homes were built by the same builder, although written records are difficult to locate. A builder often mentioned was named Rolander. It is likely that the realtor had a plan book, a style book, and a builder. People probably went through and picked out a plan and a style. Many homes are repeated in the neighborhood 3 or 4 times with the same floor plan, but with different exterior styles. There were variations such as portico placed on an opposite side, but floor plans were pretty much the same. Variations such as bay windows, limestone tracery work, moved most homes up to the level of custom built because of detail and ornamentation. Ottawa Hills epitomized a new style of neighborhood with its wider green lots, garages, flowing lawns, and restricted construction. It was the first such neighborhood in the city of Grand Rapids. The architecture of Ottawa Hills is an excellent collection of early to mid-20th century buildings, representing the prevailing styles in residential architecture during that period. Within the neighborhood, most architectural styles are of the revival vintage. A multitude of buildings are excellent to outstanding representatives of those styles. The 4 most prevalent include the Tudor Revival, the Colonial Revival, the Prairie, and French Eclectic. Tudor Revival style houses and homes with Tudor features are found in abundance throughout the neighborhood. They have been built on a wider lot with irregular footprints with 2 and 2.5 stories. Many of the houses have steep, pitched gabled roofs, secondary front gables, brick, stucco, and half timber detailing. The entries range from center locations to offset, with many of the openings being arched. Entries are either recessed, covered with small roofs, or flush with outer walls and no covering. The Tudor Revival began in 1890, but really took hold in West Michigan in the 1920s as one of the most prevalent styles for new residential construction. The popularity of this style was at its peak when Ottawa Hills was developed, and as such, one can find many variations of this style in the neighborhood. A frequent combination of styles is that of the Tudor Revival and the English cottage. These homes retain many Tudor characteristics and also include English cottage characteristics of a ground floor living space and bedrooms fitting under the eaves, 1 and 1.5 to 2 stories, an asymmetrical plan, half timbering, arrangements of tall, narrow windows in bands, and enclosed entryway. The Colonial Revival style sought to show American colonial architecture of the period around the Revolutionary War and drew strongly from Georgian architecture of Great Britain. Colonial Revival style houses are prevalent throughout the neighborhood. They were built on wider lots with basic rectangular footprints and are 1 or 2 stories. Many of the houses have moderate pitched gable roofs, dormers, brick, symmetrical design, and double-hung windows. The entries are centered, often with small, broken pediments and colonial surrounds. The Colonial Revival style has been prominent in America for several decades, beginning in the late 1800s. It became widespread in the 1920s and 1930s, and again in the 1950s. The variations located in Ottawa Hills are of the 1920s and the 1940s vintage. See more examples on the screen. The Ottawa Hills neighborhood also has examples of the prairie style of architecture in its simpler forms. Built on wide lots with square and rectangular footprints and 2-story heights, many of the houses have brick exteriors, wide overhanging eaves, and low-pitched hip roofs. The prairie style was prominent in America from the 1900s to the 1920s. There are also several examples of the French eclectic style. Typically, these homes exhibit a tall, steeply pitched, hip roof, eaves flared upward, massive chimneys, and a range of architectural detail, including coins, masonry blocks at the corner of the wall, pediments, and pilasters, an architectural element used to give the appearance of a supporting column. There are homes in Ottawa Hills that combine the Mediterranean Revival style with other architectural styles: French Eclectic, Italian Renaissance, Craftsman, and Spanish Revival. The Mediterranean style is characterized by a rectangular floor plan, symmetrical facades, stucco walls, windows in the shape of arches or circles, and wrought iron balconies with window grills. There are a few homes that can only be described as castle-like in style, as they don't fit a designated architectural style. However, characteristics would include massive brick construction, turrets, balconies, and limestone tracery. Of the approximate 19 architects and builders credited for the Ottawa Hills design, architect Alexander McCall stands out as a popular choice for many homeowners. McCall designed and A.E. Blakesley built two of the first homes in the district, including this one on Pontiac. Included in the list of architects who built in the Ottawa Hills neighborhood are two women, Lois Gillio and Fanny Boylan. In 1923, the Grand Rapids School District purchased lots 227 and 254 of Ottawa Hills Plat No. 1 for $28,000 to build a high school. The deed contained a restriction. In case for any reason it became necessary or desirable to discontinue said high school and to devote the land to other purposes by sale or otherwise, then the same shall not be sold or used for any purpose detrimental to the interests of or objected to by the residents of the vicinity. Pontiac Field shall be used as a playground and athletic field. Construction of the new high school was completed in the spring of 1925 and opened in the fall with 650 students. The building was conceived as a showcase of modern school construction with terrazzo floors, marble bathroom partitions, and ceramic moldings adorning the outside. In keeping with the Indian Village theme of the neighborhood, the entrance featured a ceramic frieze of various Indian Village scenes and the head of an Indian chief. In 1929, 4 rooms were repurposed for elementary students, crowding the building which already housed 1,465 high schoolers. In 1931, Ottawa Hills Elementary Building was added to the complex. It housed classes for grades kindergarten through 6. It too was conceived as a showcase facility. A number of Ernest Batchelder's ceramic tiles were placed on the kindergarten room's fireplace and fish pond. Some were of Dutch girls in windmills that were duplicates of tiles in Batchelder's famous Los Angeles chocolate shop, now a historic building. Los Angeles homes with Batchelder fireplaces were highly prized. In addition, stained glass inserts adorned the doors of the kindergarten room. In 1972, Ottawa Hills High School relocated to the former site of the Ridgeview Junior High on Rosewood and Burton Streets. The high school building became the home of Iroquois Middle School, while Ottawa Elementary continued to operate as an elementary building. In the spring of 2006, Grand Rapids Public Schools decided to sell 5 school buildings, including Iroquois Middle and Ottawa Elementary. That fall, attendance areas were redrawn and construction began on other facilities in the district. Iroquois Middle School was closed and the building was used by Madison Middle Elementary School and Burton Middle and Elementary Schools as the schools from those areas were rebuilt. Ottawa Hills Neighborhood Association formed a task force on the future of the school property. They began a series of meetings with the Grand Rapids Public School officials on the future of the property. On March 14, 2007, some 80 neighbors met with Superintendent Bert Blakely to discuss the disposition of the property. The task force had emphasized 6 principles that they wished to be observed by the Grand Rapids Public Schools in their future actions on the property. The 6 principles are listed above. Number 6 was probably the most important, where it says Grand Rapids Public Schools should use a request for proposal process to sell the property. Neighbors were particularly concerned that the future use of the property would be compatible with the neighborhood and recognize the original deed restriction gave neighbors a degree of power over future use. Rather than allow GRPS to simply ask for bids and sell property to the highest bidder, irrespective of future use, neighbors insisted that the school system use a request for proposal process. The school board agreed to do so. Ultimately, 3 purchase proposals were received by the due date, May 28, 2008. Questions about the adequacy of financing for 2 of the proposals led to a conclusion by both Grand Rapids Public Schools and the task force that the proposal from the Grand Rapids Christian Schools to purchase both the building and Pontiac Field was the best. Grand Rapids Christian Schools indicated that they would be willing to have the field used as a neighborhood recreation area during non-school hours, and that they intended to make improvements to the area as part of the school reconstruction. The task force representatives worked with GRC schools and their proposed architect, AMDG, during the design phase of the facility. Grand Rapids Christian School officials met with neighbors to assure that they intended to work with the neighborhood in moving their elementary school to Ottawa Hills. The sale was completed on March 26, 2009. By then, the Grand Rapids Christian School Building Task Force, including the neighborhood representatives, concluded the existing buildings were far too large to house the Christian elementary facilities. The task force concluded that while the existing building was attractive and a landmark in the neighborhood, the only practical course would be to demolish it and construct a properly sized facility for the needs of the Christian schools. For the most part, neighbors reluctantly agreed that having the property reused for school purposes was the best possible outcome, even if it meant demolishing the old Ottawa Iroquois building, whose size at that point was over 350,000 square feet. On April 24, 2009, the school held a widely attended open house so neighbors and alumni could take one last tour of the facilities. Pitch Wrecking began demolition on May 12, 2009. They offered neighbors or other interested persons the opportunity to put in a request for decorative moldings and tiles, and many neighbors availed themselves of the opportunity. To address the concern about upgrading Pontiac Field, the Ottawa Hills Neighborhood Association contributed nearly $25,000 to the Grand Rapids Christian Schools for the project, becoming the second largest donor for the school. The cinder track was capped, surrounding fences were replaced, the field was regraded, and playground equipment was replaced. The cost of the field upgrade exceeded Ottawa Hills Neighborhood Association's contribution. The Grand Rapids Christian Schools held a groundbreaking on their new school on June 4, 2009, and held their own open house on September 2, 2010. As a tribute and remembrance of Ottawa Hills Schools, which occupied the space where the new school was located, GRC incorporated design and architectural elements from the old into the new building. A special note are the 2-story columns which appear in the main entryway. A multicolored columns from the old school are neatly displayed in a main hall off the entryway. Another unique item, saved from the demolition, was the fireplace and tiles from the old elementary kindergarten room. They were incorporated into the fireplace in the new school library. GRC took special care during the demolition to make sure the batchelder tiles survived by having an artisan make plaster casts of all the tiles, so if they were damaged, they could be reproduced and the fireplace reconstructed in the new school. In addition to the artifacts from the school, the new owner made additional efforts to remember the past with the purchase of a watercolor painting by Ken Cooper, who attended Ottawa Hills from 1962 to 1966. The painting was displayed in the 2011 Art Prize, depicting the front entryway of the old school. Mr. Cooper titled the painting, "Entry into My Past, Portal to My Future, Ottawa Hills High School." While researching the history of the Ottawa Hills neighborhood, it became obvious we needed to include a discussion of the people who lived in the community from 1922 through the present. Once we started down this path, we had to include those who began their careers while attending Ottawa Hills High School and later made subsequent contributions to their communities. We are unable to list all of the prominent people who have lived in the community, but will provide a sampling of past and present residents and their significance to our city and beyond. Our research in the community told us the placement of the school in the center of the 80 acres was a very significant reason for people to move from Heritage Hill to the suburbs of Grand Rapids beginning in 1922. Inclusion of people who attended Ottawa Hills High School ends in 1972 when the school was relocated to the Ridgeview Junior High campus on Burton Street. L.V. Eberhard lived at 1144 Giddings before he relocated to East Grand Rapids. Mr. Eberhard created a grocery store chain, one being within walking distance of the Ottawa Hills neighborhood. He was a philanthropist donating money for the building at the downtown campus of WGVU. M.E. Davenport lived at 906 Giddings and was a partner in the Davenport-McClatchin Institute, which was the predecessor of the Davenport Institute and later became the current Davenport University. Two brothers built their homes and moved into the community in 1927. Their father was Adesco Heckman, who owned Heckman Biscuit Company, which was later purchased by the Keebler Company. Adesco's three sons fulfilled their father's dreams by opening the Heckman Furniture Company in 1922 and were known for crafting old world traditional furniture. Harry, who was the president, built his home at 1115 Cadillac. Jell Heckman, the treasurer of the company, built his home at 1431 Pontiac. Reynold Weidenauer grew up and lived at 827 Giddings. He was a prominent artist and printmaker of his time. The house he lived in was modified for its printing equipment, as seen in the photography from the book Reynold Weidenauer, a retrospective. His art is widely exhibited throughout the country and has won numerous awards. The Grand Rapids Art Museum has a permanent collection of his work. In 1949, at the corner of Pontiac and Chippewa Streets, Ted and Hosbein Gantos built their home. The Gantos were known for the sale of women's clothing during World War II and later opened up specialty stores in malls throughout the country. At one point in time, they had 163 stores throughout the United States. In 1952, John Boyles lived at 1140 Giddings and was a senior class president at Ottawa Hills High School. In 1963, John and his cousin, Dick Faber, purchased John's father's Kewpie restaurant and renamed it Mr. Fable's. The name was a combination of the last three letters of each of the cousins' last names. At its peak, the restaurant had 17 locations in West Michigan and was known for its olive burger and onion rings. Mr. Fable's had a secret recipe for the burger sauce and onion ring batter. 25 years after opening the restaurants, the cousins sold the chain, and Bill Lewis, Ottawa Hills High School class of 1964, and former Mr. Fable's employee, owns the trademark Mr. Fable's and would have access to the secret recipes if he opened a Mr. Fable's restaurant. Currently, Bill Lewis owns the famed Yesterdog restaurant, located on Welty Street, only blocks from the Ottawa Hills neighborhood. Yesterdog is famous for their creative serving of hot dogs, even to former United States presidents. The Lawyers, the Dillies of Ottawa Hills. There is a long and strong connection between some families in Ottawa Hills neighborhood, and the Dilly family is one of them. When Abner Dilly moved his growing family into the home at 1505 Seminole Road, the family consisted of his wife Fay and sons Robert, Albert, Donald, and daughter Dorothy. Abner continued to reside in the home for 65 years. The family witnessed many changes, including the completion of the high school and surrounding neighborhood. Abner was an attorney and had a growing legal practice, which began the nearly century-long tradition for the Dilly family. All three boys entered the services in World War II after completing their education at Ottawa Hills High School. After the war, the boys completed their legal education and joined their family's legal practice. The Dilly children returned to the neighborhood where they grew up, Robert to 1140 Giddings, Albert to 1410 Fisk, and Donald to Benjamin Street. Over the years, a third generation grew to adulthood, and nearly 15 members of the Dilley family attended and graduated from Ottawa Hills High School. Tom Dilley, a third-generation attorney and historian, is also a board member of the Grand Rapids Historical Society. The Judge's House. Bob and Mary Smolensky purchased 846 Cadillac in 1956 and lived there for 38 years. Mary attended Ottawa Hills and graduated in 1936. The couple had 10 children, 1 boy and 9 girls. The reason 846 Cadillac is called the Judge's House is there were 3 judges from that family. Bob was a police court judge in 1967 and then later elected to the 61st District Court in 1969, where he served for 15 years. Upon his retirement, attorney Michael Smolensky, their son, was appointed to replace his father as judge of the 61st District Court. In 1990, Michael was elected to the Kent County Circuit Court, where he served for 5 years before being elected to the Michigan Court of Appeals in 1995. Michael served in that court until he passed away in May of 2009. The third judge is Sarah Smolensky, the 7th daughter of the family. She received her law degree from Thomas Cooley in 1982 and in 1990 was elected to the bench of the 63rd District Court and became its chief judge in 1996 by appointment of the Michigan Supreme Court. Judge Sarah says the family loved Ottawa Hills neighborhood and the neighbors who lived there and became lifelong friends. The Ottawa Hills neighborhood enjoyed many more prominent people who lived within its boundaries. Some even lived in several different houses within the neighborhood. Here are the names that you might recognize, which include mayors, city attorney, city manager, director of the Public Museum, director of the Grand Rapids Economic Development, also the original realtor who developed the Ottawa Hills neighborhood. There are also many Grand Rapids school board members in the list. After the creation of the Ottawa Hills School in 1925, and before the school was relocated from Ottawa Hills neighborhood in 1972, it graduated people who made a difference in their communities and other people's lives. Lawrence Bernie Jefferson graduated from Ottawa Hills in 1935, where he played football through high school and became the team's captain his senior year. He was also co-captain of the basketball team, ran track, and was a member of the student council. After high school, Bernie continued his football career at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. He was a 5'11" all-conference fullback from 1936 through 1938. During this period, he played against U of M lineman Gerald R. Ford. In 1943, during World War II, Bernie was a pilot and flew a P-51 Mustang attack fighter airplane in Europe with the 332nd Fighter Group known as the celebrated all-black Tuskegee Airmen. He flew over 100 missions in Europe and was awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross for heroism and extraordinary achievement for a mission he flew in August of 1944. The class of 1951 at Ottawa Hills had several special athletes and people who made a difference at the school and in their community. The photo of the basketball team in the middle shows co-captains Bob Hendrickson and Don Eddy. Bob Hendrickson says Ottawa Hills was my life from age 13 to age 60, with the exception of his 4 years at Hope College. Upon graduation from college, Bob returned to Ottawa Hills, where he taught, was an administrator, and coached basketball until his retirement. The basketball teams of 1968 and 69 were state Class A champions. Coach said, "It was great for me to spend so much of my life at Ottawa Hills. I had opportunities to move on, but I never wanted to go. I was living my dream. Some say Don Eddy was the best athlete ever from Grand Rapids. He won 11 letters while participating in football, basketball, and baseball. He went on to play football, basketball, and baseball at the University of Michigan. He dropped football after his freshman year to concentrate on basketball and baseball. In basketball, he played guard and was an All-Big Ten Conference player. In baseball, Eddy was a third baseman and selected to the All-American team in 1955. After graduation in 1955, he signed with the Chicago Cubs to play professional baseball. His baseball career was interrupted in 1956 when he was drafted into the military, where he served with the Air Force from 1956 through 1958, after which he returned to the Chicago Cubs organization. In 1996, Eddy was inducted into the Grand Rapids Sports Hall of Fame. A plaque signifying his admittance is in the Van Andel Arena. In 1960, the class of Ottawa Hills High School had two of the most distinguished athletes of their time, Bob Lertzma and Mickey Stanley. Bob Lertzma's claim to fame was as a defensive end and tackle with 3 NFL teams over an 11-year career. While playing for the Minnesota Vikings, he played in 2 Super Bowls, numbers 8 and 9 in 1974 and 75. Following his NFL career, he was a popular spokesman for businesses in the Twin Cities. Mickey Stanley was an outstanding athlete for Ottawa in football, basketball, and baseball. Shortly after graduation, he signed a minor league baseball contract with the Detroit Tigers. He made his first appearance with the Tigers on September 13, 1964, and continued to play with the team for the next 15 years. Mickey played center field, where he won 4 Gold Glove Awards in 1968, 69, 70, and 73. Mickey was also a member of the Detroit Tigers World Series championship in 1968. Before the 1968 World Series, Mickey exclusively played center field and was noted for his speed, strong arm, good hands, and the ability to get the jump on the ball when it was hit between the gaps between fielders. Manager Mayo Smith had 4 outstanding outfielders in 1968: Al Kaline, Willie Horton, Jim Northrup, and Mickey Stanley. The team had a problem. It needed another bat in the lineup because Ray Euler, although a very good defensive player, was hitting only a .135 for the year. Although Stanley had never played shortstop since high school, he was asked to play the position the last few games of the regular 1968 season and all 7 games of the World Series against the St. Louis Cardinals. The Tigers were down in the series 3-1, and in the 5th game, Stanley led the Tigers to a comeback by hitting a triple and scoring 2 runs for the win. Detroit won the next 2 games and the series 4-3. In December of 1999, ESPN aired a program called The End of the Century, during which Mayo Smith's move of Stanley to shortstop in the 1968 series was rated as the number 4 of the 10 greatest sports decisions of the 20th century. Another athlete of distinction from Ottawa Hills was Rob Ellis, who graduated in 1968. Rob was an outstanding athlete in baseball and was drafted by the San Francisco Giants out of high school. He didn't sign with San Francisco, but rather enrolled at Michigan State University, where he played baseball from 1968 through 1971. At the end of the 1971 season, Ellis was voted College Baseball Player of the Year and was named to the All-American squad. In that year's Major League Baseball draft, Ellis was chosen 3rd by the Milwaukee Brewers. Ellis signed a major league contract and was immediately promoted to the major league team, bypassing their minor league system. He was only the 4th player to go directly to the major leagues without playing a day in the minor league system. Rob retired from baseball in 1980. After his playing days, he coached in the minors and served as an assistant coach for Michigan State University from 1985 through 1990. During these years, he also earned a master's degree in psychology and is currently a counselor and director of Marketplace Ministries in Grand Rapids. Another member of class of 1968, point guard on the state basketball championship team, and a very good baseball player, was Marshall Purnell. Although recruited by the Boston Red Sox for his skill as a player, he chose not to pursue sports as a career, but chose to attend the University of Michigan and earn a degree in architecture and urban planning, and later a master's degree in architecture. In 2007, Marshall was honored for his work by the University of Michigan, awarding him a Distinguished Service Award and Architectural Service Award. Marshall is recognized as one of the most accomplished architects in the field, as evidenced by his serving as president of the American Institute of Architects and the National Organization of Minority Architects. For 35 years, he served as a principal in the design firm of Devereaux and Parnell Architects, Washington, D.C. The firm was responsible for extremely large projects in Washington and throughout the country, as well as internationally. Notable of these projects in Washington area was the Washington Convention Center, the Washington National Baseball Park, the Verizon Center, which houses the NBA and NHL teams, and the National Martin Luther King Memorial, just to name a few. The firm has also been responsible for projects in 86 different U.S. ambassadors' residence worldwide. Another classmate of Coach Bob Hendricks and Don Eddy in the graduating class of 1951 was seemingly not as gifted as the two of them. Although Bob and his classmate have remained lifelong friends, they were seen as different by their classmates. Bob and Don were outstanding athletes, while their classmate was average. At the end of their senior year, the class voted Jack Clifford the least likely to succeed, and boy were they wrong. Jack said he never thought he was college-bound, but the early influence of Ottawa Hills principal Elmo Waringa convinced him otherwise. The principal recognized the influence the classmates had on Jack and would call him down to his office for a pep talk. Mr. Clifford credits his change in attitude to his principal and older sister, Rose Jean. The story of Jack Clifford was published in his book entitled The Least Likely to Succeed, Jack Clifford, creator of the Food Network. In the book, Jack describes his contact with radio broadcasting while at Western Michigan University, and after graduation, Jack worked in radio, television, as well as the early development of the cable network. During this time, he devised the concept behind the Food Network, which is seen by millions every day. The concept, he said, required fun, and anyone could watch it without being embarrassed. The Food Network helped Jack make his fortune. Jack, with all of his wealth, took to heart the lessons learned from his sister and his high school principal. He wanted to give back to those who helped him, and he has, many times over. The broadcasting schools at Western Michigan and Arizona State University bear his name because of his philanthropy to the universities. In 2001, Jack wanted to give back to Ottawa Hills High School by establishing a scholarship in the name of his friend and principal, Elmo Waringa. In 2002, Jack made a contribution to the Grand Rapids Community Foundation, and with the help of another Ottawa Hills alumni group, a merger of funds occurred. The new scholarship focused on students, like Jack, not at the top of their class, but to students who showed promise and were eager to learn. He wanted to give to those students the encouragement Elmo Waringa gave him. The scholarships have been awarded every spring for the past 15 years by a committee of alumni, attorney Steve Marshall, Bob Hendrickson, and a representative of the Grand Rapids Foundation, and Jack Clifford, who flies in for a week to interview the scholarship candidates. At the end of the spring 2017 interview process, 7 $10,000 scholarships were awarded to the future graduates of Ottawa Hills. Over 80 scholarships have been awarded since the inception of the scholarship in 2002. We want to thank all the people who appear on the screen for their help and aid in putting this program together. We want to give special thanks to Kathy Vance, Nancy Court, Lee Engstrom, Joanne Jostin, Ned Zimmerman, and Randy Wilda for the digital presentation. We also want to thank the Grand Rapids Library and the Grand Rapids Archives for all their assistance. The poster that you see is one that was produced in 2018. It's called The Doors of Ottawa Hills. This was done by Kathy Kelly with the aid of her father, Hank Milanowski, who took all the pictures. The poster is sold to neighbors and friends, and the money goes to the tree planting project in our community. We hope you've enjoyed the presentation as much as we have enjoyed the process of creating it, and you've learned about the creation of our community.